The weeks following Shaka's death transformed Talion's understanding of Mordor. What had seemed at first to be simple wasteland revealed itself as complex territory, divided into regions controlled by competing warlords, populated not just by orcs, but by enslaved humans clinging to survival. Each day brought new discoveries, new horrors, and uncomfortable truths about the nature of his quest. Gollum proved more valuable than Talion had anticipated. Despite his disturbing habits and constant self-conversation, the creature knew Mordor with intimate familiarity, understanding not just geography, but the social structures that governed orc society. He could identify which captains served which war chiefs, predict where patrols would appear, and most importantly, navigate the wilderness without triggering the numerous dangers lurking there. Their partnership developed an odd rhythm. Gollum would disappear for hours, hunting fish in toxic streams, or searching for roots that somehow remained edible despite the corrupted soil. When he returned, he brought information gathered from eavesdropping on orc conversations, or observing movements from hidden vantage points. His contribution was reconnaissance more than combat, and he made it clear he had no intention of fighting. During one of their camps in a cave system that offered temporary shelter, Gollum finally revealed why he helped at all. They sat on opposite sides of a small fire, its light making shadows dance on ancient stone walls, covered in forgotten carvings. Gollum remembers freedom. Yes, precious, he said, voice taking on an unusually reflective quality. Long ago, before the precious came, before everything changed, we was different then. Not always so twisted and hungry. Had a loaf, had a Talion, cleaning his sword as had become nightly ritual, listened without commenting. He had learned that Gollum's rare moments of lucidity deserved attention. The bright lord, Gollum continued, looking at Talion but clearly seeing through him to Celebrimbor's presence, made the precious, forged it with the Dark Lord, gave it terrible power. That power ruined so many lives, turned good creatures into monsters. Yes, it did. Gollum thinks maybe the Bright Lord should fix what it broke, save some of the ruined ones, yes? Or at least stop more from being ruined. The accusation hung in the air, direct despite Gollum's usual circular speech patterns. Celebrimbor's presence in Talion's mind stirred uncomfortably, but offered no response. The Wraith's silence spoke volumes, confirming the truth of Gollum's claims, even as it avoided direct acknowledgement. I didn't forge any rings, Talion said quietly. That was done thousands of years before I was born. I'm not responsible for Celebrimbor's mistakes. Gollum's laugh was bitter. No, not responsible for old mistakes. But Precious Ranger makes new mistakes, yes? Walks same path, uses same methods, domination, control, breaking minds and wills. The Bright Lord teaches these things, and Dead Man learns too well. Gollum sees it happening, sees the Ranger becoming what he hates. The observation struck deeper than Talion wanted to admit. In the weeks since his resurrection, he had killed dozens of orcs, dominated their minds, bent their will to his purpose. Each use of wraith power felt more natural, less disturbing. He had stopped hesitating before reaching into an enemy's thoughts, stopped questioning whether such violation was justified. Efficiency had replaced morality in his decision-making. What would you have me do? Talion asked, genuinely curious. The Black Hand murdered my family. His servants enforce Sauron's will across Mordor. Should I negotiate with them? Ask politely for justice. No, no, killing is necessary, Gollum agreed. But precious Ranger should remember why he kills, should remember the woman and the child, yes, should remember their faces and their love. When killing becomes easy, when it stops hurting, that is when Ranger stops being Ranger and becomes monster instead. The conversation ended there, but its impact lingered. Talion found himself examining his actions more critically, questioning methods he had begun to accept as normal. Was dominating an orc's mind truly different from Sauron's corruption? The scale differed certainly, but did the principle? These were uncomfortable questions with no easy answers. His education in Mordor's complexities deepened when he encountered the first human settlement in the Sea of Nirnen. The southern region presented stark contrast to Udun's wasteland. Here vegetation grew, though twisted by proximity to evil. Fields stretched between slave compounds, worked by humans under constant orc supervision. The sight awakened protective instincts Talion thought had died with his family. He watched from a ridge as enslaved workers toiled in the heat, their backs marked by whip scars, their faces empty of hope. Children labored alongside adults, too young to understand why they suffered, old enough to know nothing else existed. Orc overseers walked between rows of workers, striking anyone who slowed, killing those who collapsed. The brutality was casual, routine, just another day in Sauron's agricultural machine. Celebrimbor urged caution. We cannot save everyone. Our mission targets the Black Hand and his captains. Involving ourselves in every injustice will dilute our effectiveness. But Talion descended toward the settlement anyway, compelled by something deeper than tactical thinking. These were his people, citizens of Gondor captured during raids, or their children born into slavery. Leaving them to suffer while pursuing personal revenge felt like betrayal of everything he had once stood for. The rescue was not clean or easy. Orcs died quickly under his blade, but their deaths alerted others. Reinforcements arrived from a nearby camp, forcing Talion to fight while trying to protect panicking civilians. Several enslaved humans died in the chaos, caught by orc weapons or trampled in the confusion. The price of liberation was blood, both enemy and innocent. When the fighting ended, he stood among freed slaves who looked at him with fear and gratitude in equal measure. They saw his wraith-enhanced abilities, the way he moved through combat like something not quite alive, and they did not know whether to thank him or flee from him. An older woman, her gray hair marking her as a survivor of many years in captivity, approached cautiously. You are the one they speak of, the Grave Walker. The orcs fear you. Her voice carried the flat affect of someone who had endured too much to waste energy on emotion. I'm just a ranger, Talion replied, the lie feeling hollow even as he spoke it. He was far more and far less than a ranger now. Rangers died at the Black Gate, the woman said. We heard the orcs celebrating it. But you did not die, or you died and came back. Either way, you are not what you were. She studied his face, searching for something. Will you help us reach safety, or was this rescue for your conscience only? The accusation was fair. He had attacked on impulse, without planning for aftermath. These people needed guidance to safe territory, protection during the journey, and he was alone with limited ability to provide either. but neither could he abandon them after creating this situation. "There are resistance camps hidden in the hills," Talion said, drawing on memories he had taken from dominated orcs, led by a woman named Marwyn and her daughter. "I can lead you there, teach you to move unseen, but I cannot stay. My path leads elsewhere." The journey took 3 days, moving at the pace of the slowest child, avoiding orc patrols through careful route selection and liberal use of wraith sight. During those days, Talion learned their stories. The old woman had been a merchant in Minas Tirith before capture. A young man had been a farmer, his entire family killed, except for his sister who walked beside him in silence. Children who had never known freedom asked innocent questions about the world beyond Mordor's borders. Each story added weight to the burden Talion carried. These were not abstract victims, but specific people whose lives had been destroyed by the same evil that had taken his family. Their suffering was his suffering, multiplied across hundreds or thousands of similar cases throughout Mordor. The scope of it threatened to overwhelm him. They reached the resistance camp on the 3rd evening, finding it hidden in a narrow valley where volcanic activity created natural heat sources and underground water. Crude shelters housed perhaps 50 people, a mix of recently freed slaves and long-term resistance fighters. Smoke from cooking fires was dispersed through careful venting to avoid detection. Guards posted at the valley entrance looked exhausted but alert. The woman who emerged to greet them carried herself with authority, despite ragged clothing and visible battle scars. Lithariel was perhaps 30, dark-haired and sharp-eyed, moving with the controlled grace of trained warrior. She studied Talion with immediate suspicion, hand never far from her sword hilt. "You're the one killing captains," she said without preamble. "The orcs call you Gravewalker. They fear you, which makes you useful. But what are you really? Living or dead? Man or spirit? Both and neither," Talion answered honestly. "I was killed at the Black Gate. Something brought me back. Now I hunt those responsible." Lithariel's expression remained guarded. "Personal revenge, then. That makes you dangerous in multiple ways. Useful for now, but potentially problematic if your goals conflict with our survival." "Your people can benefit from what I do," Talion said. "Every captain I kill weakens the infrastructure, keeping them enslaved. Every fortress I disrupt creates opportunity for escape. Our interests align." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but understand this clearly. These people are not resources for your vengeance. They are lives I'm responsible for protecting. If helping you endangers them, I will stop helping regardless of your righteous anger." The bluntness was refreshing after Gollum's cryptic speech and Celebrimbor's manipulation. Talion respected the clarity, even as it complicated his situation. "Fair enough. I've brought you refugees. They need shelter and guidance. Beyond that, we have nothing further to discuss." But Lithariel was not finished. "My mother was Queen Marwyn, ruler of these southern lands before Sauron's forces captured her. They did not simply imprison her. They corrupted her, twisted her mind with dark magic until she serves them willingly. She now rules from Nirnan's capital as puppet queen, enforcing their will on her own people." The pain in Lithariel's voice was carefully controlled but unmistakable. "You want revenge for your family. I want my mother back. Or if that's impossible, I want her freed from the slavery that is worse than death. Perhaps we can help each other. You have power I lack. I have knowledge of Nirnan's fortifications and guard rotations. Talion felt Celebrimbor's interest sharpen in his mind. The Wraith saw opportunity, strategic advantage, in alliance with organized resistance. But Talion heard something else in Lithariel's words. Grief, guilt, desperate hope, despite overwhelming odds. These were emotions he understood intimately. "Tell me about your mother," he said, moving away from the others to speak privately. "Tell me everything." Over the next hours, Lithariel detailed Queen Marwen's capture, the gradual corruption that followed, and her current state. The magic binding her was complex, not simple domination, but fundamental alteration of thought and loyalty. She genuinely believed Sauron's cause was just, saw enslaving her own people as necessary service. Breaking such deep corruption might be impossible, but Talion had resources normal resistance fighters lacked. Celebrimbor contributed knowledge of similar magic from his own experience. The corruption follows patterns established by the One Ring. It does not merely control, but rewrites the victim's fundamental nature. Breaking it requires either Sauron's defeat or direct intervention by power equal to what created the binding. "Can you do it?" Talion asked directly, speaking to the Wraith rather than Lithariel. "Possibly," Celebrimbor hedged. "If we can reach her, if I can analyze the specific enchantments used, I might be able to disrupt them. But understand that success would only restore her original nature. If her mind has been corrupted too long, that original nature may be irreparably damaged. We might free a broken woman rather than a functional queen." Talion relayed this to Lithariel, who absorbed the information with visible effort at maintaining composure. "Any chance is better than what she endures now. Even if we only grant her death with her own mind intact, that would be mercy." They planned the infiltration carefully, drawing on Lithariel's intelligence and Talion's supernatural abilities. Queen Marwen's fortress in Nirnan was heavily guarded, but not impregnable. Regular supply deliveries provided potential entry points. Lithariel could provide disguises and forged orders. Talion's Wraith site would allow navigation through blind spots and patrol patterns. The operation would take time to prepare, requiring reconnaissance and resource gathering. During the weeks of planning, Talion found himself integrated into the resistance camp's daily life. He trained fighters in combat techniques, shared tactical knowledge from his ranger experience, and used his abilities to scout orc positions that threatened the valley. In return, he learned their stories. Each person in the camp carried trauma and loss, similar to his own. The difference was they had found purpose beyond revenge. They fought to save others, to preserve hope, to maintain human dignity in hell. Their example challenged Talion's single-minded focus on the Black Hand. One evening, sitting with Lithariel as they reviewed maps, she asked the question that cut to the heart of his internal conflict. "After you kill the Black Hand, what then? Will you finally die, or will you be stuck in this state forever?" Talion did not have an answer. He had not thought beyond revenge, could not imagine existence after that goal was achieved. The question implied a future he had not considered, continuation beyond the singular purpose that defined him. "I don't know," he admitted. "Celebrimbor says we're bound until our purpose is fulfilled. Maybe killing the Black Hand will satisfy that condition. Maybe it won't. I try not to think about it." "That seems unwise," Lithariel observed. "Fighting without purpose beyond destruction leaves you empty when destruction is complete. Trust me, I've seen it happen to too many resistance fighters. They live for revenge and have nothing left when it's achieved. Her words echoed Gollum's warnings about becoming what he fought against. Multiple voices now telling him the same thing, suggesting his path was flawed, even if his goal was just. But what alternative existed? Stop hunting the Black Hand? Accept his family's murders as simply tragedy, rather than injustice demanding response? That seemed impossible. During this time, Celebrimbor's own history continued revealing itself in fragments. The Wraith would sometimes lose focus during conversation, distracted by memories thousands of years old. Talion witnessed, through their shared consciousness, moments from Celebrimbor's life. The joy of creating beautiful objects. The pride when other elves praised his work. The friendship with Sauron before the betrayal, when Anatar had seemed wise and generous. Most painfully, he experienced Celebrimbor's memories of family. A wife whose face the Wraith could barely remember after so many centuries. A daughter who had loved music and flowers. Domestic moments that paralleled Talion's own lost happiness. The torture and death of these beloved people replayed in perfect detail. Preserved by Wraith nature that did not allow forgetting. You carry them with you. Talion observed during one such episode. After all this time, the pain hasn't faded. Pain is all I have left of them. Celebrimbor replied, if I stop hurting, I stop remembering. If I stop remembering, they truly die. So I choose pain, choose to carry these wounds forever, because the alternative is forgetting they existed. The logic was twisted, but understandable. Talion recognized the same impulse in himself. The fear that moving beyond grief meant betraying Eorith and Deerhail. By keeping the wounds fresh, he maintained a connection to them. But he also trapped himself in perpetual suffering, unable to heal or grow beyond the moment of their deaths. Gollum, who often lurked at the edges of camp, despite the resistance fighters' unease with his presence, offered perspective from his own experience. The precious was taken from Gollum. Yes, it was, stolen by nasty Baggins. Gollum could have moved on, could have found new life. But no, Gollum held on to the loss. Let it define everything. Now look what Gollum became. A warning, yes, precious. A warning of what happens when pain becomes identity. The casual self-awareness was startling, suggesting depths to Gollum's madness that included understanding of his own condition. He was both victim and warning, simultaneously pitiable and cautionary. As preparations for the Queen Marwen rescue progressed, Talion found his perspective shifting. What had begun as purely revenge-motivated killing was evolving into something more complex. He still wanted the Black Hand dead, still intended to hunt down every orc responsible for that night at the Black Gate. But alongside that desire grew awareness of larger responsibility. The resistance fighters looked to him as symbol and weapon. Freed slaves spoke his name with hope. Even orcs, in their fear, acknowledged him as force of change. He had power to affect Mordor's future beyond simply killing his family's murderers. The question was whether he would exercise that power or remain focused solely on personal vendetta. Lithariel seemed to sense his internal struggle. "You're realizing that you matter," she said. "Not just as instrument of revenge, but as actual force for good. It's uncomfortable because it requires thinking beyond yourself, beyond your pain. Much easier to focus on killing specific enemies than accepting broader responsibility. She was right, and the realization brought no comfort. Talion had been a soldier, trained to follow orders and complete missions. He had been a father, focused on his small family unit. Neither role prepared him for the position he now occupied, where his choices affected hundreds of lives and his actions shaped Mordor's power structures. The night before the planned infiltration of Marwen's fortress, Talion sat alone outside the camp, looking toward the distant volcanic glow that marked Mordor's industrial heart. Celebrimbor's presence in his mind was quieter than usual, the wraith apparently giving him space to think. "I'm not a hero," Talion said aloud to no one in particular. "I'm just a man who lost everything and wants those responsible to pay. That's not noble or inspiring. It's basic and selfish. And yet you saved those slaves." Lithariel's voice came from behind him. She approached and sat nearby, respectful of his space, but offering companionship. "You're helping rescue my mother. You train our fighters and scout our enemies. These are not the actions of purely selfish man. They're distractions," Talion insisted. "Side quests on the way to my real goal." "Perhaps," Lithariel allowed, "or perhaps your real goal is evolving into something larger without you noticing. Maybe the man who died at the Black Gate was motivated only by revenge, but the thing that returned is becoming something else. Something that could genuinely help free Mordor from Sauron's grip." Talion wanted to reject the suggestion, to maintain clear distinction between his revenge and any heroic purpose. But honesty forced him to acknowledge the truth in her words. He had changed, was still changing. The question was whether that change represented growth or simply different form of corruption. Tomorrow would bring action rather than contemplation. They would infiltrate the fortress, attempt to free Queen Marwen, and discover whether Celebrimbor's power could truly break Sauron's enchantments. Success would strengthen the resistance and provide valuable intelligence. Failure would likely mean death for Lithariel, and possibly permanent entrapment in his undead state for Talion. Either way, the path forward was set. The journey that had begun with simple revenge was becoming something more complex, more challenging, and potentially more meaningful. Whether Talion was ready for that evolution remained to be seen. The infiltration of Queen Marwen's fortress began at dawn, when guards were tired from night watch and new shifts had not yet fully awakened. Talion wore stolen orc armor that fit poorly but provided enough disguise to pass casual inspection. Lithariel moved separately, using servants' clothing and forged papers identifying her as slave delivering supplies. They would converge inside the fortress, find the queen, and attempt whatever liberation was possible. The fortress walls rose from Nirnin's green fields like a cancerous growth. Black stone imported from volcanic regions, architecture designed to intimidate rather than inspire. Guard towers overlooked all approaches, but Talion's wraith sight revealed blind spots in their coverage. He moved through these gaps with practiced ease, scaling walls during moments when sentries looked elsewhere. Inside, the fortress was a study in contrast. Public areas displayed wealth and power, attempting to project legitimate rulership. Tapestries hung on walls, depicting scenes of Mordor's strength and Sauron's inevitable victory. Floors were clean, guards were disciplined, and everything suggested ordered civilization. But Wraithsight showed the truth beneath the facade. Fear permeated every stone. The servants moved with the careful precision of people who knew mistakes meant death. The guards' thoughts, visible to Celebrimbor's perception, revealed barely contained terror of their superiors. Queen Marwen's chambers occupied the fortress's highest level, accessible through main corridors that were too well guarded, or service passages that Lethariel's intelligence suggested would be less monitored. Talion chose the latter, descending into the fortress's lower levels, where support staff maintained the infrastructure, allowing luxury above. Here he found the reality behind the facade. Slaves worked in kitchens where heat was unbearable, preparing elaborate meals they would never taste. Others hauled water from deep wells, their backs bent from years of labor. Children cleaned floors on hands and knees, too young to work heavier tasks, but old enough to be useful. The casual cruelty was worse than anything in the field camps. At least there, brutality was obvious. Here it was hidden beneath veneer of civilization. An orc overseer blocked the passage ahead, questioning a servant who had apparently made some minor error. The conversation was escalating toward violence, the orc raising his hand to strike. Talion moved without thinking, covering the distance in seconds, blade finding the orc's throat before the blow could land. The servant stared at Talion with wide eyes, clearly recognizing that something was wrong with this orc soldier who moved too fast and killed his own kind to protect slaves. Before questions could be asked, Talion pressed a finger to his lips, urging silence, then continued toward the service stairs. Lethariel appeared from a side passage as planned, her disguise having gotten her past the main gates. They ascended together in silence, knowing that conversation increased risk of detection. The service stairs were narrow and poorly lit, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Occasionally they had to press against walls as other servants passed, averting their eyes as was expected of lower caste individuals. The queen's level was different from everything below. Guards here were elite, their armor better maintained, their bearing more professional. These were not random orc conscripts, but trained soldiers who took their duty seriously. Getting past them would require either perfect timing or application of abilities that would reveal Talion's true nature. He chose timing. Wraith Sight showed him the guard patrol patterns, revealed the brief windows when corridors were empty. They moved during these windows, pressing into alcoves when necessary, barely breathing as patrols passed within arm's reach. The tension was excruciating, each moment pregnant with possibility of discovery and violent confrontation. Queen Marwen's private chambers were guarded by two massive uruks, the largest and most dangerous orc subspecies. Their presence indicated the queen's importance and the level of control exercised over her. These guards would not be easily overcome, and their deaths would raise immediate alarm. Celebrimbor's voice whispered in Talion's mind. Use her domination. Reach into their thoughts and command them to step aside. It requires no physical violence, leaves no evidence. He reached out with wraith power, feeling the disgusting sensation of his consciousness sliding into alien thoughts. The Uruk minds were surprisingly complex, not the simple brutality he had expected. but layered with genuine thoughts and emotions. One worried about a younger brother serving in a dangerous posting. The other was hungry and looking forward to the meal that would come with shift change. These were not mindless monsters, but thinking beings with concerns and desires. Talion crushed those thoughts, imposed his will over theirs. Step aside. Allow us to pass. Forget you saw us. The commands were absolute, leaving no room for resistance. The Aruks moved mechanically, their expressions going blank as foreign will controlled their bodies. They opened the door and stepped back, permitting entry. The violation made Talion's stomach turn. He had just erased portions of two beings' autonomy, treated them as objects to be manipulated. That one worried about his brother would not remember making the choice to betray his post. The hungry one would not understand why he suddenly felt compelled to act against training. Both would suffer punishment for failure they could not explain or remember. Necessary, Celebrimbor said, sensing Talion's discomfort. Regrettable, perhaps, but necessary. Would you prefer to kill them? That seems more permanently harmful than temporary mental adjustment. The rationalization did not help. Killing in combat was terrible, but at least honest. This was something else, something that felt closer to Sauron's methods than Talion wanted to acknowledge. Inside the chambers, Queen Marwen sat at a writing desk, composing correspondence. She was a woman in her 50s, still beautiful despite years of captivity, her bearing regal even in corruption. She looked up as they entered, showing no surprise or alarm, only mild curiosity. "Withariel," she said, voice warm with what seemed like genuine affection. "How unexpected. And you've brought a guest. How interesting." Her eyes found Talion with unsettling accuracy, seeing past his disguise. "The Grave Walker. I've heard such stories about you." Lithariel moved forward, her composure cracking slightly. "Mother, we're here to help you, to break whatever enchantment binds you to Sauron's service." Marwen's smile was gentle, almost pitying. "My dear child, there is no enchantment. I serve willingly because I have seen the truth. Sauron offers order, stability, and purpose. The alternative is chaos that benefits no one." She stood, moving with grace that suggested no physical restraint. "I tried to teach you this, to show you that resistance only prolongs suffering. Cooperation brings peace." "That's the corruption speaking," Lithariel insisted, though her voice wavered. "You don't truly believe that. You fought against Sauron for years before your capture. You led resistance efforts, protected your people." "I was mistaken then," Marwen said with conviction that sounded absolutely genuine. "I've learned better. Sauron is inevitable. His victory is certain. The only choice is whether we accept that reality and prosper under his rule, or deny it and suffer pointlessly." Talion felt Celebrimbor's consciousness, pressing forward, examining Marwen through wraith sight. What he saw disturbed them both. The corruption was not external enchantment that could be removed like chains. It had integrated completely with her fundamental thoughts, becoming indistinguishable from her actual beliefs. Breaking it would require essentially destroying her personality and hoping something recognizable remained. "Can you do it?" Talion asked silently. "Perhaps," Celebrimbor replied with unusual uncertainty. "But understand what success means. I would be ripping apart the core of her identity, excising portions of her mind that have become corrupted. What remains might be the woman Lithariel remembers, or it might be an empty shell, or something entirely new. There is no way to know until after the attempt." Marwen watched this internal conversation with apparent understanding. The Wraith speaks to you, doesn't it? Celebrimbor, the Bright Lord, maker of rings and architect of his own downfall. He wants to try repairing me, as if I'm broken. But I'm not broken. I'm enlightened. The use of Celebrimbor's name shocked both Talion and the Wraith. This information should not be available to her, suggested connections to intelligence sources they had not anticipated. Marwen's smile widened at their reaction. Did you think your activities went unnoticed? That killing captains and disrupting fortresses was anonymous work? The Black Hand knows exactly who you are, both of you. He knows what you seek and where your path leads. In fact, he's quite pleased by your progress. Talion's hand moved to his sword instinctively. Pleased. I've killed dozens of his servants, dismantled significant portions of his infrastructure. Yes, Marwen agreed pleasantly. And in doing so, you've eliminated inefficiency, removed weak leadership, and consolidated power in ways that serve his purposes better than the previous chaos. Every captain you kill is replaced by someone stronger. Every fortress you disrupt is rebuilt with better defenses. You're not damaging his organization. You're improving it through natural selection. The words hit like physical blows. Talion had been so focused on revenge, on methodically working through the Black Hand's forces toward the ultimate target, that he had not considered the systemic effects. Could he really be helping rather than hindering? The possibility was nauseating. Celebrimbor's voice was tight with concern. She may be lying, trying to demoralize us. Or she may be telling the truth, Talion countered. You've lived thousands of years. Have you considered that we might be playing exactly into Sauron's hands? The Wraith's silence was answer enough. He had been so focused on revenge, so consumed by his own need for vengeance, that strategic thinking had taken secondary priority, and Talion, blinded by grief and rage, had followed that leadership without questioning. Lithariel looked between them, sensing the shift in dynamics without understanding specifics. What is she saying? What does the Black Hand know? Before Talion could answer, Marwen continued. The Black Hand prepared for your resurrection, Gravewalker. The ritual at the Black Gate was designed to bind Celebrimbor's wraith to a living host. Your family was chosen specifically because your grief would make you susceptible to the wraith's influence. Everything was calculated. Lies, Celebrimbor said, but the protest lacked conviction. The binding was accident of circumstance, not planned. Was it? Marwen asked rhetorically. Ask yourself, Bright Lord, how convenient that you appeared at that exact moment, that the ritual created conditions, allowing your merge with suitable host. Sauron learned from your previous encounter. He knows how you think, what motivates you, what you desire. Did you truly believe you could oppose him using methods he taught you? The chamber seemed to contract around them. Every assumption Talion had made since his resurrection was suddenly questionable. Had his entire journey been manipulation? Was his quest for revenge actually serving the enemy he sought to destroy? Lithariel's voice cut through the spiraling doubt. Even if that's true, even if the Black Hand anticipated our moves, we're still here. We can still free you, still work against him. Free me to what purpose? Marwen asked gently. Return me to leading doomed resistance? Watch more of my people die for pride rather than accepting inevitable reality? No, daughter. The kindest thing you can do is leave me as I am. Better yet, join me. Use your influence with the resistance to negotiate surrender. Save lives rather than throwing them away on hopeless struggle. The offer was delivered with such maternal concern, such apparent love, that for a moment Lithariel wavered. Talion could see the conflict in her face, the desire to have her mother back, warring with understanding that this corrupted version was not truly her. That moment of vulnerability was when everything went wrong. Alarms blared throughout the fortress, the sound designed to pierce ears and disorient. Guards began converging on their location, dozens of footsteps thundering through corridors. The dominated Uruks outside, their temporary mental control apparently wearing off, burst through the door with weapons drawn. Marwyn remained seated, calm despite the chaos. "I'm sorry, Lithariel, I truly am, but I could not allow this to proceed further. The guards were notified the moment you entered my chambers. I hope to convince you peacefully, but if you insist on this path, you leave me no choice." Talion moved immediately, his sword cutting down the first Uruk before the massive orc could react. But more were coming, far more than could be fought in this confined space. Wraith abilities provided advantage, but not invincibility, and Lefariel was fully human, with normal limitations. "We need to leave," Talion said urgently. "Now." They fought toward the door, Talion's blade working with supernatural speed, while Lefariel covered their withdrawal with efficient sword work that spoke to serious training. Bodies fell, but each death brought more enemies. The fortress was responding with military precision, cordoning off escape routes and funneling them toward prepared kill zones. Celebrimbor took partial control, enhancing Talion's abilities beyond what he could consciously manage. They moved through enemies like smoke, appearing and disappearing, killing with precise efficiency. But even enhanced, the mathematics of combat remained unfavorable. There were too many orcs, too much organized resistance. They reached a window overlooking the fortress courtyard. Below, more guards assembled, blocking the main exit. Behind, pursuers closed in. They were trapped, with no obvious escape route. Talion prepared for desperate final stand, knowing that immortality did not guarantee victory, only that defeat would be temporary. Then Celebrimbor did something unexpected. The Wraith's consciousness surged forward, taking complete control of their shared body. Talion found himself passenger in his own flesh, watching through his eyes, but unable to affect action. Celebrimbor raised their hands, and power manifested unlike anything Talion had witnessed before. Silver light exploded outward, not the controlled application of Wraith abilities, but raw, unleashed force. The windows shattered, stone cracked, and every orc within 20 feet was thrown backward by invisible pressure. The display was magnificent and terrifying, demonstrating capabilities Celebrimbor had kept hidden until this desperate moment. "Take her and run," Celebrimbor commanded through Talion's mouth, the voice harmonically wrong, clearly not human. He gestured toward Lithariel, then toward the now open window. "I will hold them." Lithariel hesitated only briefly before grabbing a rope from fallen supplies and securing it to internal fixtures. She descended rapidly, trusting that Talion would follow. But Talion was not in control, could only watch as Celebrimbor turned back toward the advancing guards. What followed was slaughter dressed in silver light. Celebrimbor did not fight so much as unmake. Orcs rushed forward and simply ceased to exist, their forms dissolving into ash. Others dropped their weapons, clutching their heads as alien thoughts invaded their minds. The Wraith was not holding back anymore, was demonstrating the full, terrible power that came from thousands of years of existence and intimate knowledge of ring magic. The guards broke and fled. Even orc courage had limits when facing something that treated physical laws as suggestions. Within minutes, the entire fortress level was abandoned, except for corpses and those whose minds had been shattered beyond recovery. The display should have brought satisfaction, proof of their power. Instead, Talion felt horror. "What did you just do?" he demanded internally, struggling to regain control of his own body. "What was necessary," Celebrimbor replied, already releasing control back to Talion. "We were trapped. I employed sufficient force to create escape opportunity. You destroyed them," Talion said, feeling his body respond to his commands again. "Not killed in combat, but unmade. You went into their minds and broke them permanently." "Yes," Celebrimbor acknowledged without apparent guilt. "This disturbs you because it's exactly what Sauron does," Talion said, moving toward the window to follow Lithariel's escape. "You just demonstrated the same methods, the same disregard for life and mind. How are we different from him if we use identical tactics?" "Intent," Celebrimbor said simply. "Sauron corrupts for domination and control. I defend and liberate. The methods may appear similar, but purpose distinguishes them." Talion did not have time to argue the point, but the conversation continued as he climbed down the rope. "That's exactly the kind of rationalization tyrants use. Good intentions justifying terrible actions. You're proving Queen Marwen's point about walking the same path Sauron walked." He reached the ground where Lithariel waited, her expression caught between relief at escape and confusion about what she had witnessed. They ran together toward the fortress walls, using chaos from Celebrimbor's display to avoid organized pursuit. Behind them, the fortress remained in shock, its systems disrupted by the sheer overwhelming force they had encountered. They did not stop running until they reached the hills beyond cultivated fields, putting significant distance between themselves and likely pursuit. Only then did they pause to catch breath and assess situation. Lithariel looked at Talion with new wariness, having seen capabilities he had not previously revealed. "What are you?" she asked, the question carrying weight of genuine need to understand. "I knew you had wraith powers, but that was something else entirely. That was the kind of force that reshapes reality." "That was Celebrimbor at full strength," Talion admitted. "Apparently he's been holding back, using fraction of his actual capability." "I didn't know he could do that." Celebrimbor's voice was defensive. "I use minimum necessary force. Revealing full capabilities makes us target for greater attention. Today, circumstances demanded exception." "Or today you got frustrated and stopped pretending," Talion countered. "Stopped hiding what you actually are." Lithariel watched this internal dialogue with growing concern. "You're arguing with the Wraith. Does he control you, or do you control him?" "Both and neither," Talion said tiredly. "We share space, make decisions together usually. But as you just saw, he can take control when he chooses. I'm partner and prisoner simultaneously." The admission hung between them, acknowledging vulnerability Talion had not previously voiced. Lithariel's hand moved unconsciously toward her weapon, then away, clearly conflicted. She had seen him save lives and take them, fight for justice and employ methods indistinguishable from evil. Understanding which was his true nature became increasingly difficult. My mother, Lothariel said, changing subject to something equally painful. Can she be saved? Did Celebrimbor learn anything from examining her? Talion relayed the Wraith's assessment, watching hope drain from Lothariel's face as he explained the depth of corruption and uncertain outcome of any attempt at restoration. When he finished, she sat heavily on a rock, head in her hands. So I've lost her, Lothariel said quietly. Not to death, but to something worse. She lives, but is not herself, and bringing her back might destroy what remains. She looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. Tell me honestly, is she right? Are we serving the Black Hand's purposes with our resistance? Celebrimbor wanted to dismiss the concern, to insist their cause was just, regardless of outcomes. But Talion overrode him, offering Lothariel the truth as he understood it. I don't know. It's possible we're being manipulated. The Black Hand clearly has deeper plans than we understood. But what's the alternative? Stop fighting because our enemy is clever? The alternative is being smarter, Lothariel said with sudden intensity. Stop reacting to what they do and start forcing them to react to us. Stop playing their game and create new rules. She stood, wiping her eyes, visibly pulling herself together. If they anticipated revenge-driven killing and power consolidation, then we do something unexpected, something that actually threatens their goals rather than advancing them. The suggestion was strategically sound, but required letting go of the simple path Talion had been following. Methodically killing captains and hunting the Black Hand felt concrete, achievable. Developing complex strategy to outmaneuver Sauron's forces was far more complicated and uncertain. What do you propose? Talion asked, genuinely curious. Lothariel began outlining ideas as they walked back toward the resistance camp. Rather than attacking random targets, identify keystone positions whose loss would actually disrupt operations. Rather than killing every captain, turn some of them, using Talion's domination abilities, to create internal conflicts that weakened the hierarchy from within. Rather than seeking direct confrontation with the Black Hand, first eliminate his support structure until he was isolated and vulnerable. The plans were sophisticated, requiring intelligence gathering and careful timing. They would take longer than Talion's previous approach, but might actually achieve lasting damage rather than temporary disruption. Celebrimbor listened with growing interest, his strategic mind appreciating the complexity. She thinks like a general, the Wraith observed. Not like an assassin or berserker. Her approach has merit, but implementation would require trusting Lothariel's judgment over his own instincts, accepting that revenge needed tempering with strategy. It would mean working with the resistance as true partners rather than convenient assets. Most difficult, it would require admitting that his previous months of activity might have been counterproductive. They reached the camp by nightfall, finding it in state of controlled panic. Scouts had reported increased orc activity throughout the region, patrols being reinforced and fortresses going on alert. The fortress escape had clearly triggered larger response than anticipated. The resistance would need to relocate, disperse, or prepare for direct attack. Talion helped with preparations, using Wraith Sight to scout approach routes and identify defensible positions. But even as he worked, questions planted by Queen Marwyn continued growing. How much of his journey was choice versus manipulation? When did justified revenge become blind vengeance, serving enemy purposes? Could he trust Celebrimbor's guidance when the Wraith had hidden his true capabilities and possibly his true agenda? That night, unable to sleep despite exhaustion. Talion confronted these questions directly. He found a quiet spot away from the camp and spoke to Celebrimbor as he would to another person, rather than passenger in his mind. "Tell me the truth," Talion said. "All of it. What do you really want? What is your actual plan, beyond killing the Black Hand?" Celebrimbor was silent for a long moment before responding. "I want to forge a new ring of power," the Wraith finally admitted. "One that can control Sauron's ring, dominate the Dark Lord as he dominates others. It is the only way to truly defeat him, using his own weapon against him." The revelation was not entirely surprising, but hearing it stated explicitly changed everything. "So you want to create the very thing that caused all this suffering in the first place. You want to repeat the mistake that led to your death and Mordor's existence." "I want to correct that mistake," Celebrimbor insisted. "The rings I forged were flawed because I did not understand Sauron's deception. But now I know his methods, understand the One Ring's vulnerabilities. A new ring, forged with that knowledge, could bind the One Ring and its master." "And who would wear this new ring?" Talion asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Who would wield that power?" "We would," Celebrimbor said. "Together, we have the will to resist corruption, the purpose to use power justly. We could bind Sauron, dismantle his empire, and then destroy all rings, including the new one. Clean slate for Middle-earth." The plan was seductive in its simplicity and terrifying in its hubris. Create ultimate power, use it to defeat evil, then voluntarily give up that power. History suggested such plans never worked as intended. Power corrupted absolutely, and those who believed themselves immune were most susceptible. "No," Talion said firmly. "I won't help you forge another ring. That path leads to becoming exactly what we fight against." Celebrimbor's presence flared with frustration. "Then what alternative do you propose? Hope that conventional warfare defeats a Dark Lord who has survived millennia? Trust that good intentions overcome supernatural evil?" "I don't have a complete answer," Talion admitted. "But I know creating weapons of ultimate power is not the solution. We find another way, or we fail honestly, rather than succeed through corruption." The disagreement hung between them, unresolved and potentially relationship-destroying. They were bound together, but no longer aligned in purpose. Celebrimbor wanted to recreate his greatest work, convinced he could succeed where he had previously failed. Talion wanted simple justice for his family without becoming monster in the process. Over following days, this tension colored every interaction. When they fought orcs, Celebrimbor pushed for domination and mental control, while Talion preferred clean kills. When they gathered intelligence, Celebrimbor sought information about ancient forges and ring lore, while Talion focused on Black Hand's movements. They were still effective together, but no longer harmonious, their partnership fraying under weight of conflicting goals. Ithariel noticed the change. "You're fighting him more," she observed. "The Wraith. I can see it in how you move. Hesitation that wasn't there before." "He wants to forge a ring of power," Talion told her, seeing no point in concealment. "He thinks it's the only way to defeat Sauron. I think it's path to becoming Sauron." Her expression showed understanding and concern. "If you two cannot work together, cannot trust each other, then you're vulnerable. The Black Hand will exploit that division." "I know," Talion acknowledged, "but I can't compromise on this." Some lines cannot be crossed, even for victory. The conversation was interrupted by Scout, returning with urgent news. A major force was approaching the valley, led by one of the Black Hand's captains. The Hammer of Sauron himself was coming, apparently considering the resistance significant enough to warrant personal attention. They had perhaps hours before assault began. Not enough time to evacuate everyone. Talion and Lothario organized defenses, knowing they were inadequate against the force approaching, but unable to simply abandon the camp. Fighters took positions at the valley entrance, prepared to sell their lives, buying time for civilians to escape through back routes. The mood was grim, but determined. These people had chosen resistance, knowing it meant likely death. As preparations completed and waiting began, Gollum appeared from wherever he had been lurking. The creature looked more agitated than usual, practically vibrating with nervous energy. "They comes, yes, precious. They comes with fire and death," Gollum hissed. But Gollum knows things, yes. Gollum hears them talking, the nasty orcs and their master. They says this is test, yes, test for the Grave Walker. The Hammer wants to see what Precious Ranger can do, wants to measure his strength. A test? Talion asked. For what purpose? Gollum's eyes were huge and knowing. For the real work, yes, Precious. The Black Hand doesn't want to kill you. He wants to use you. Everything has been preparation, getting you ready for something bigger. What that something is, Gollum does not know. But it is not killing. No, it's something else. The information aligned with Queen Marwen's suggestions about manipulation and long-term plans. Talion was not just revenge-seeking weapon, but piece in larger game whose rules he did not understand. The realization should have been paralyzing, but instead clarified his thinking. Then we give them something unexpected, Talion said, making decision that would define his path forward. We survive this attack, not through power, but through cunning. We deny them the test they want and create our own conditions. The Hammer of Sauron had expected conquest and found only ghosts. His army entered the valley to discover an abandoned camp, fire still burning, food half-eaten, as if the resistance had fled in panic. But the Hammer had not survived centuries of service to the Dark Lord by accepting obvious conclusions. He ordered cautious advance, scouts checking for ambushes, his personal guard maintaining tight formation around him. The first trap triggered when his vanguard reached the valley's narrow center. Explosives hidden in rock formations detonated simultaneously, bringing down stone walls that crushed dozens of orcs and blocked the main passage. Not enough to destroy the army, but sufficient to sow confusion and separate forward elements from reinforcements. Then came the arrows. Resistance fighters positioned in elevated positions rained projectiles down on orcs trapped between fallen rocks. The casualties were significant, but the tactical impact was greater. The Hammer's force, accustomed to overwhelming inferior enemies through numbers, found itself funneled into kill zones where numerical advantage meant nothing. Talion watched from concealed position, tracking the Hammer's movements through wraith sight. The Black Captain was directing countermeasures with impressive competence, sending climbers to flank the archers' positions, while his main force worked to clear the rock blockade. Given time, he would break through the defenses and resume his advance, which was why Talion did not give him time. He moved through the chaos using Shadow Strike, appearing behind isolated orcs and eliminating them silently. His goal was not maximum casualties, but maximum confusion. Make the hammer's forces fear every shadow, question every sound, waste resources guarding against threats that might not exist. Lithariel led the actual fighting retreat, moving her people through prepared routes while maintaining harassment that made pursuit costly. She was proving herself a natural tactical leader, keeping discipline despite the terror her fighters felt facing a black captain's army. Every position was held exactly long enough to inflict damage before withdrawal, each retreat covering the next position. The hammer himself grew increasingly frustrated as his advance stalled repeatedly. Talion could sense it through Wraith sight, the black captain's rage building with each setback. This was supposed to be simple elimination of minor irritant. Instead, it was becoming embarrassing display of incompetence as ragtag resistance repeatedly outmaneuvered professional army. Finally, the hammer made mistake they had been waiting for. Enraged by continued setbacks, he took personal command of forward assault group and charged ahead of his main force. Pride overrode tactical sense. Need to prove superiority overwhelming caution. Talion met him in a narrow defile, where the hammer's size was disadvantage rather than asset. The black captain was massive, easily 8 feet tall, his armor thick enough to stop most weapons. The warhammer he carried looked heavy enough to crush stone, which it probably could. In open combat with proper support, he would be nearly unstoppable. But this was not open combat. This was ambush in confined space against opponent who did not fight fairly. Talion struck from concealment, blade targeting joints in the heavy armor. The first blow scored across the hammer's knee, drawing black blood but not incapacitating. The second was blocked by superhuman reflexes, as the hammer spun faster than his bulk suggested possible. The warhammer swung with terrible force, missing Talion by inches as he used Shadow Strike to relocate. The weapon struck stone where he had been standing, pulverizing rock and sending shrapnel flying. The hammer was already tracking his movement. Combat instincts compensated for supernatural speed. They fought through the defile, Talion using mobility and precision against raw power and durability. Every exchange confirmed what he had suspected. The hammer was not testing him or measuring capabilities. The black captain was trying to kill him with serious intent. Whatever larger plan existed, it apparently did not require Talion's survival in this moment. Celebrimbor urged greater force. Stop holding back. Use domination. Break his mind as we did with the fortress guards. But Talion refused, maintaining discipline even as the hammer's attacks came closer to connecting. Using full Wraith power would demonstrate capabilities they wanted kept hidden. Moreover, something about the hammer's technique seemed designed to provoke exactly that response. The way he left openings that would tempt use of supernatural abilities, the pattern of his attacks that seemed calculated to frustrate and enrage. This was not just assassination attempt. This was test disguised as assassination attempt. The hammer wanted to see full capabilities, pushed Talion into revealing everything. Queen Marwen's warnings echoed in Talion's mind. They wanted to measure him, understand him, prepare for whatever role he was meant to play. So Talion gave them nothing useful. He fought like a highly skilled ranger with slightly enhanced speed. Nothing that could not be explained as adrenaline or exceptional training. when the hammer created opening that screamed for supernatural exploitation. Talion took conventional option instead. He was deliberately underwhelming, intentionally disappointing. The hammer seemed to sense this, his frustration becoming genuine rather than tactical. "You hide your true strength," he growled between exchanges. "The stories claim you cannot die, that you are wraith, given flesh. Show me that power, or die like the mortal you pretend to be." Talion said nothing, continuing his pattern of disciplined strikes against vulnerable points. The hammer's armor was showing damage now. Joints weakened, plates cracked. The Black Captain was still dangerous, but no longer invincible. Victory was possible through persistence rather than overwhelming force. Then reinforcements arrived. Orc warriors poured into the defile from both ends, surrounding them. The tactical situation reversed instantly. Talion could fight the hammer alone, but not the hammer plus dozens of supporting troops. Escape was necessary and immediate. He triggered smoke bombs salvaged from orc supplies, filling the narrow space with choking black clouds. Under cover of confusion, he used Shadow Strike to exit the kill zone, appearing outside the encirclement. The hammer roared commands, trying to organize pursuit. But Talion was already gone into the labyrinth of passages that honeycombed these hills. The engagement had achieved its purpose. The hammer's advance was stalled, his forces scattered and demoralized. The resistance had evacuated successfully, moving to new locations the hammer would need weeks to discover. And Talion had denied them the demonstration they sought, remaining enigma rather than quantified threat. Lithariel was waiting at their rally point, looking exhausted but satisfied. "We lost 7 fighters, but saved over 60 civilians. Better than I dared hope." She studied Talion's expression. "You're not happy, though. What happened with the hammer?" "He was testing me," Talion explained, "trying to make me reveal full capabilities. I think I frustrated him by fighting conservatively, but that means he'll be back with different approach." "Good," Lithariel said unexpectedly. "Let him be frustrated. Let them all be confused about what you are and what you can do. Mystery is weapon too." The weeks that followed established new pattern. Rather than hunting captains randomly, they identified those whose territories controlled key resources or strategic positions. Rather than killing them immediately, Talion dominated selected targets and used them to spread misinformation and create conflicts with neighboring warlords. The orc hierarchy, already prone to internal struggle, began tearing itself apart with minimal additional encouragement. Celebrimbor hated this approach. The Wraith wanted direct action, overwhelming displays of power, rapid progress toward the Black Hand. But Talion maintained strategy of misdirection and manipulation, using the absolute minimum force necessary for each objective. Their disagreements over tactics became constant background tension. The Wraith growing increasingly impatient with what he saw as unnecessary caution. "We waste time," Celebrimbor argued during one particularly contentious internal debate. "Every day we delay is another day Sauron grows stronger. Another day the Black Hand consolidates power. Your subtlety accomplishes nothing meaningful." "It keeps us alive and unpredictable," Talion countered. "The moment we become predictable, we become vulnerable to whatever trap they're preparing." Their partnership was fracturing, held together only by the binding that forced them to coexist. Talion found himself actively resisting the Wraith's influence, fighting to maintain control of their shared body during combat. Celebrimbor responded by withholding information and capabilities, punishing Talion for refusing to follow his preferred approach. Gollum watched this deterioration with knowing eyes. They fights each other more than enemies, yes, precious. Soon the Ranger and the Wraith will tear each other apart, and then everyone loses. Gollum has seen this before, yes, seen what happens when two spirits share one body. Never ends well, no. The creature's prophecy seemed accurate. During one mission to infiltrate an orc fortress, the internal conflict nearly got them killed. Talion was attempting stealthy approach when Celebrimbor suddenly seized control and attacked openly, apparently deciding that stealth was taking too long. The resulting fight was brutal and nearly fatal, saved only by lucky timing that brought reinforcements to the area, forcing the orcs to retreat and regroup. Afterward, Talion and Celebrimbor had their most serious confrontation yet. "You could have killed us both," Talion said, his fury barely contained, "taking you with me. Then, perhaps you should stop constraining us with cowardly tactics," Celebrimbor shot back. "I have fought wars and built empires. I understand strategy better than any human. Your refusal to use available power is not wisdom, but fear. And your eagerness to use that power is exactly what Sauron wants," Talion said. "You're so desperate to forge your new ring that you don't see how that desperation makes you manipulable. They want you to pursue that goal because it serves their purposes." The accusation struck home. Celebrimbor fell silent, his presence withdrawing to sullen corner of their shared consciousness. The Wraith did not speak to Talion for 3 days afterward, communicating only when absolutely necessary for survival. The Cold War within Talion's mind made every task more difficult. It was during this period of internal dysfunction that they discovered something that changed everything. Following intelligence about a Black Hand courier, they intercepted the messenger and extracted information from his memories. What they found was architectural plans, detailed schematics for some kind of ritual chamber. Lithariel examined the plans with growing concern. "This is being built in Barad-dûr itself. Look at the scale. This is not simple fortress room, but major construction project. What could require such elaborate preparation?" Celebrimbor's attention fixed on specific details in the plans. Talion felt the Wraith's shock and recognition. "I know this design. It is forge configuration, adapted for specific purpose. They are preparing to create something." "Create what?" Talion demanded. "A ring of power," Celebrimbor said quietly. "The Black Hand intends to forge a new ring. These plans use my own designs, modified and enhanced. They have been planning this for years, perhaps decades." The revelation recontextualized everything. If the Black Hand was forging his own ring of power, then the balance of power in Middle-earth was about to shift dramatically. Sauron already controlled the One Ring. Adding another ring under his control could make him unstoppable. "We need to destroy that forge," Talion said immediately, "before they can complete whatever they're building." But Celebrimbor's response was unexpected. "No, we need to claim it, take control of the forge, and use it for our purposes. This is the opportunity we've been waiting for. The infrastructure is already being built. We simply need to seize it at the right moment." Talion felt cold dread. "You want to use Sauron's forge to create your own ring? That's your plan. Let them do the preparatory work, then steal it at the last moment." "It is efficient," Celebrimbor said defensively, "Why build our own forge when enemies have done the work for us? The Black Hand clearly expects to forge a ring. We ensure that ring serves our purposes instead of his." Or, Talion said slowly, "the Black Hand wants you to think exactly that. This whole thing could be an elaborate trap designed to get you into that forge, attempting ring creation under conditions he controls." The logic was sound, but Celebrimbor was too invested to accept it. You see conspiracies everywhere. Sometimes the simple explanation is correct. They're building a forge. We can seize it. This paranoia serves no purpose. Their argument was interrupted by alarm from the resistance camp. Scouts reported massive troop movements, not toward their location, but away from it, heading south toward Nernan's core territories. Something was happening. Some operation larger than routine patrol or supply run. Talion used dominated captain piecing together picture of what was occurring. The Tower of Sauron, the third Black Captain, was mobilizing major assault against remaining resistance strongholds in the south. Not exploratory raids, but coordinated elimination campaign. "They're cleaning house," Lithariel said grimly, "removing all organized opposition before moving forward with whatever the Forge project represents. They want no distractions when the crucial moment comes." The Tower's campaign was brutally effective. Within days, multiple resistance camps were overrun, their defenders killed or captured. The survivors fled to Lithariel's location, bringing tales of overwhelming force and systematic slaughter. The Tower was not taking prisoners or offering terms. This was extermination. Talion faced choice that would define his path forward. Continue focusing on the Black Hand and the mysterious forge, or divert to help resistance fighters facing imminent destruction. The tactical answer was obvious. Saving the resistance accomplished nothing toward his primary goal of revenge. But the human answer was equally clear. These were his people, facing death while he pursued personal vendetta. Celebrimbor advocated strongly for ignoring the resistance. "They are doomed regardless of our intervention. The Tower commands forces we cannot match. Attempting rescue would be suicide without purpose. Better to maintain focus on achievable objective." But Talion was already making preparations to move south. "We're going to help them. Argue if you want, but I'm not abandoning people to die when I have power to intervene." This is exactly the kind of emotional decision-making that gets people killed, Celebrimbor said with frustration. "You think with your heart rather than your head." "Good," Talion replied. "The day I stop thinking with my heart is the day I become what we're fighting against." He gathered intelligence on the Tower's positions and movements, identifying vulnerabilities in the Black Captain's campaign. The Tower was powerful, but not invincible. His forces were spread across multiple simultaneous operations, creating opportunities for determined opposition to inflict disproportionate damage. Lithariel's fighters joined Talion's mission willingly, despite understanding the risks. They had lost friends and family to the Tower's assault. Striking back, even at terrible cost, felt necessary for maintaining will to continue resisting. The second engagement was Fortress Siege, where captured resistance leaders were being held. Talion infiltrated alone, using wraith abilities to navigate defenses the tower thought impregnable. He freed the prisoners and created chaos that allowed them to escape during the confusion. The tower's reputation for invincibility suffered significant damage from that humiliation. But the third engagement nearly destroyed them. The tower, enraged by repeated failures, set trap using false intelligence about vulnerable convoy. When Talion and Lithariel's fighters attacked, they discovered they were the ones being ambushed. The tower himself commanded the counterattack, his tactical brilliance on full display. They fought running battle through hostile terrain, losing people with every engagement. The tower's forces pressed them relentlessly, using superior numbers and coordination to cut off escape routes. By the time they reached temporary safety in Cave System, they had lost half their fighters, and Lithariel was seriously wounded. Karein treated her injuries as best he could, with limited supplies, watching her fade in and out of consciousness. The other survivors looked to him for answers he did not have. They were trapped in defensible position, but surrounded by overwhelming force. The tower was methodically securing the area, preparing final assault that would eliminate them completely. Celebrimbor offered solution. Use full power. Dominate their entire force. Turn them against each other. Unleash capabilities you've been hiding. It is only option for survival, and he was probably right. Half measures would not save them now. The tower was too competent, his forces too numerous. Defeating them required demonstrating the full terrible power that came from Wraith and Mortal combined. It required becoming the weapon Celebrimbor wanted him to be. Talion stood at the cave entrance, watching orc forces position for final assault. Behind him, wounded and exhausted resistance fighters prepared for last stand. The choice seemed clear. Reveal everything and probably survive, or maintain subtlety and certainly die. But revealing everything meant giving the Black Hand exactly what he wanted. It meant confirming their value as tools and instruments. It meant walking directly into whatever trap had been prepared. The paranoia that Celebrimbor dismissed as irrational felt increasingly justified. There's a third option, Talion said, suddenly. We don't fight at all. He turned to the survivors, to Lithariel, barely conscious, but listening. We surrender, publicly, completely, with witnesses. We let the tower capture us and present us to the Black Hand as trophies. The suggestion was met with immediate protest from both fighters and Celebrimbor. Surrender meant torture and death, meant betraying everything they had fought for. But Talion overrode their objections, explaining the logic. They want us in Barad-dûr. Everything has been driving us toward that destination. Fighting our way there means arriving on their terms, weakened and desperate. But surrendering as prisoners means arriving unexpected, with element of surprise, in position to strike when they're not prepared. The plan was insane and might not work, but fighting openly guaranteed failure. At least surrender offered possibility, however slim, of turning situation to their advantage. Sometimes the only way to win was refusing to play the game as expected. Lithariel, through pain and exhaustion, managed weak laugh. That is either brilliance or suicidal madness, possibly both. She looked at the other fighters. I won't order anyone to follow this plan. It's pure gamble with all our lives. One by one, the survivors indicated acceptance. They were dead anyway if they fought. At least this way offered chance, however remote, of achieving something meaningful before the end. They had all accepted death when they joined the resistance. The manner of that death mattered less than what it accomplished. Talion walked out of the cave with hands raised, making surrender obvious. The tower's forces surrounded him immediately, weapons ready. Gollum's arrival shattered the calculated precision of the moment. The creature moved with surprising speed, his obsession overriding any sense of self-preservation. He lunged toward the forge, toward the ring that called to something deep in his corrupted nature. Guards attempted to intercept him, but Gollum slipped through their grasp with the slippery efficiency of someone who had spent decades evading capture. The Black Hand raised one hand, dark energy gathering to strike down the intruder. But in that split second of distraction, something shifted in Talion's consciousness. Celebrimbor's grip on their shared body loosened fractionally, his attention divided between completing the ring and processing this unexpected disruption. Talion seized that moment with desperate force. He wrenched control back from the Wraith, feeling their shared consciousness tear with the violence of the separation. His hand, which had been reaching to complete the final enchantment on the ring, instead grasped the unfinished work and hurled it into the forge's deepest flames. The ring, not quite complete, not fully stabilized, reacted catastrophically to immersion in pure elemental fire. Power that had been carefully balanced erupted in uncontrolled cascade. The forge itself seemed to scream, a sound that resonated through stone and bone alike. Silver light exploded outward, blinding everyone in the chamber. Celebrimbor's anguish flooded through their connection. The Wraith had been so close to redemption, so near to correcting millennia of regret. Watching that possibility literally melt into slag was agony beyond anything physical. But beneath the grief, Talion felt something else. Relief. The Wraith had been freed from temptation that had controlled him for thousands of years. The explosion threw everyone back. Talion hit the wall hard enough that a normal human would have died from impact. Instead, he felt ribs crack and heal almost immediately, the strange immortality maintaining his body despite catastrophic damage. Through watering eyes, he saw chaos unfolding. Gollum had been closest to the blast. The creature lay crumpled against overturned equipment, whimpering but alive. His resilience was remarkable, though whether that came from whatever had preserved him through his long existence or simple dumb luck was unclear. The guards were scattered, some unconscious, others struggling to recover their bearings. The Black Hand stood at the room's center, seemingly unaffected by the blast. His borrowed face showed rage so intense it bordered on madness. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that hurt to hear, as if multiple beings spoke through single throat simultaneously. "You dare," he said, each word precise despite the fury behind them. "You dare destroy what was meant to elevate you beyond mortality, beyond limitation? You choose damnation over divinity." Talion climbed to his feet, body aching from injuries that were already fading. "I choose humanity over whatever corruption you were offering. We're done being your tools." The Black Hand moved with speed that defied his armored bulk. One moment he stood across the room, the next his hand was around Talion's throat, lifting him from the ground with casual strength. "You misunderstand your position. The ring was gift, reward for service. Its destruction changes nothing about your ultimate purpose. You will serve regardless. The only question is whether that service comes willingly, or after we break everything you are and rebuild from the pieces. Celebrimbor surged forward in their shared consciousness, and for once, Talion welcomed it. Their combined will manifested as silver light erupting from Talion's body, forcing the Black Hand to release his grip. Talion dropped to the ground and immediately went on the offensive, blade appearing in his hand from where it had been confiscated. The fight that followed was beyond anything Talion had experienced. The Black Hand was not simply powerful. He was skilled with millennia of combat experience. Moreover, he fought using techniques that Celebrimbor recognized because they were his own. Sauron had not just taken the elf's body, but had absorbed his muscle memory, his instincts, his fighting style. It was like battling a dark mirror. Every move Talion made was anticipated, because Celebrimbor's body knew those moves intimately. Every feint was seen through, every combination blocked or countered. They were fighting themselves, and it was brutally effective defense. "Do you understand now?" the Black Hand asked, almost conversationally, while simultaneously blocking a strike that should have been impossible to see coming. "I know everything the Bright Lord knows, every secret, every technique, every weakness. You cannot surprise me because I am you, or rather, you are pale reflection of what I have become." But the Black Hand's confidence contained seeds of its own defeat. He was so certain of superiority that he failed to account for the one element that was not Celebrimbor: Talion's humanity, his unpredictability, his willingness to do things that made no tactical sense if they felt right emotionally. Talion stopped trying to fight skillfully. Instead, he fought desperately, trading efficiency for aggression. He accepted hits that he could have dodged, took risks that any sane fighter would avoid, pushed forward with reckless abandon that bordered on suicidal. It was not Celebrimbor's style, and therefore the Black Hand struggled to adapt. The battle raged through the forge chamber, destroying equipment and scattering enchanted materials. Gollum had recovered enough to flee, disappearing through ventilation shaft that should have been too small for passage. His departure went unnoticed by combatants focused entirely on each other. Lithariel, who had been forgotten in the chaos, found herself unchained. The explosion had damaged the enchanted restraints enough that she could break free. She looked around the destroyed forge, at Talion fighting impossible battle against the Black Hand, at guards beginning to recover and organize. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape while opportunity existed. Instead, she grabbed a fallen weapon and attacked the nearest guard. Her intervention created additional chaos, forcing the Black Hand to divide attention. The distraction was brief but sufficient. Talion's blade found opening, scoring deep cut across the Black Hand's armor. Black blood welled from the wound, steaming where it contacted air. The Black Hand looked at the injury with something approaching surprise. He had not expected to be hurt, had not anticipated that these prisoners could actually threaten him. The miscalculation was minor but real. "Enough," the Black Hand declared, raising both hands. Dark energy poured from him, Not targeted attack, but area effect that struck everything simultaneously. Talion and Lithariel were both thrown back, their bodies racked by pain that went beyond physical. It was violation of their very essence, attack on the fundamental nature of their being. When the assault ended, they lay gasping on the floor. The Black Hand approached slowly, clearly preparing to end this permanently. But before he could deliver killing blow, alarm bells began ringing throughout Barad-dûr. Not the local alert of forge room incident, but fortress-wide emergency signal. A guard stumbled into the chamber, his face showing genuine fear. "Lord Hand, the southern walls are under attack. A massive force, seemingly from nowhere. They're using tactics we've never encountered, striking at points we thought unassailable." The Black Hand's expression shifted from rage to calculation in an instant. He looked at Talion and Lithariel, clearly weighing whether to kill them now or deal with the larger threat. Finally, he gestured to the guards. "Secure them in the deepest cells. No chains this time. Solid stone. No light, no contact. They can contemplate their failure while we address this interruption." As they were dragged away, Talion caught glimpse through the forge's window. Beyond Barad-dûr's walls, fires burned in organized patterns. Someone was attacking Mordor's heart, and they were doing so with competence that suggested significant force. The timing was too convenient to be coincidence. Someone had orchestrated this, planned it to coincide with events in the forge. The cells they were thrown into lived up to the Black Hand's description. Absolute darkness, silence so complete it became physical pressure, isolation so total that time lost meaning. Talion could not see Lithariel, though he knew she was nearby. He could not tell if minutes or hours passed. The sensory deprivation was its own form of torture, designed to break minds through absence rather than presence. In that darkness, Celebrimbor's voice was only companionship. The wraith spoke with unusual introspection, the destruction of the ring having apparently triggered something in his ancient psyche. "I have been fool," Celebrimbor admitted. "For thousands of years, I believed the answer was to create better ring, more perfect version that would succeed where the originals failed. But you showed me the truth when you destroyed it." The problem was never the craftsmanship. It was the entire concept. Power concentrated in objects will always corrupt, will always be turned to domination. I was trying to solve problem by creating more of the problem. Talion, unable to see or do anything else, listened. This was perhaps the most honest the Wraith had ever been with him. Vulnerability, forced by circumstance and failure. "I have watched ages pass," Celebrimbor continued, "seen empires rise and fall, witnessed heroes and villains, observed the endless cycle of power and corruption. And in all that time, I learned nothing. I remained frozen at the moment of my greatest mistake, trying endlessly to correct it through the same methods that caused it. You, who have lived mere decades, understood what I could not in millennia. Some problems cannot be solved. They can only be refused." "What now?" Talion asked into the darkness. "We're trapped deeper than before. The Black Hand is even more hostile, and we destroyed the one thing they might have kept us alive to create. Our situation has not improved." "No," Celebrimbor agreed. But we are not tools anymore. We are prisoners, which is strangely liberating. They cannot use us for their purposes because we have proven unreliable. The question becomes what we do with that freedom, limited as it is. Time passed in that cell, unmeasurable and oppressive. Talion drifted between consciousness and something like sleep, though dreams and waking blurred together in the darkness. He had visions that might have been memories, might have been Celebrimbor's past bleeding through, or might have been simple hallucination from sensory deprivation. He saw the forging of the original rings of power, witnessed Celebrimbor's pride in his creations, saw Sauron wearing fair form, presenting himself as the teacher and benefactor, saw the moment of betrayal when the One Ring was first put on and all deception fell away. The memories were not his, but felt real enough to be painful. He also saw his own past with new clarity, his life with Ioreth and Deerhail, the small moments of happiness he had taken for granted, teaching his son to read, sharing quiet conversations with his wife after long patrol shifts, feeling content with simple existence. That life seemed impossibly distant now, separated not just by death, but by fundamental transformation of his nature. Finally, after what might have been days, the cell door opened. Light flooded in, agonizing after prolonged darkness. Talion's eyes, even enhanced by wraith nature, struggled to adjust. When vision cleared, he saw not the Black Hand or his guards, but a figure he did not recognize. The newcomer was human, dressed in robes that mixed scholarly appearance with practical travel wear. He was older, perhaps 60, with weathered features that suggested hard life. Most surprisingly, he moved without fear or restraint, suggesting authority within Barad-dûr that seemed impossible for a human. "Can you walk?" the man asked in Westron, the common tongue of Middle-earth. His accent marked him as originally from Gondor, though that origin was clearly far in his past. Talion climbed to his feet with effort, his body stiff from confinement. "Who are you?" "Someone who's decided that my master's plans have gone too far," the man replied. "My name does not matter. What matters is that the attack on the southern walls is diversion, and we have perhaps an hour before it is repelled. In that hour, you can either remain in this cell until the Black Hand returns to finish what he started, or you can follow me to a possibility of escape." Lethariel emerged from adjacent cell, looking as disoriented as Talion felt. "Why would you help us? What do you gain?" The man smiled without humor. "I have served Sauron for 30 years, believing that his order was preferable to the chaos of free peoples governing themselves. I have rationalized, compromised, and overlooked atrocities because I convinced myself the alternative was worse. But watching the Black Hand prepare to enslave all of Middle-earth through ringcraft, I finally understood. There is no order worth this price. Some cures are worse than the disease." He led them through passages that avoided main corridors, using service tunnels and forgotten routes that suggested deep knowledge of Barad-dûr's structure. They passed storerooms filled with weapons, barracks where off-duty orcs slept, chambers whose purpose Talion could not begin to guess. The tower was even larger than external appearance suggested, a city unto itself. "The attack outside is led by a coalition of resistance groups," their guide explained as they moved. "Someone managed to unite them, convince them that coordinated strike was possible. I do not know who organized it, but I provided them intelligence about vulnerabilities. This is my penance, helping them where I can. They reached a section of wall where ancient drainage system provided route outside the fortress. The passage was narrow and treacherous, clearly not designed for regular use, but it was unguarded, apparently considered too difficult to be viable escape route. This will take you beyond the outer walls, the man said. After that, you are on your own. I cannot leave. My defection would be discovered immediately, and I have family who would suffer for my betrayal. This is all I can do. Talion grasped the man's shoulder in brief acknowledgement. You have given us more than we had right to expect. Whatever happens, know that you made difference. The man nodded, then disappeared back into the fortress. Talion and Lithariel entered the drainage tunnel, crawling through darkness that was at least purposeful rather than imprisonment. The journey was claustrophobic and unpleasant, but it was movement toward freedom. They emerged outside Barad-dûr's walls as dawn broke over Mordor, such as dawn ever truly came to this cursed land. The sight that greeted them was chaos of battle. Fires burned across multiple positions. Orc forces rushed to defend breaches in their perimeter, and attacking with coordinated precision was force that seemed impossibly diverse. Talion recognized fighters from Lithariel's resistance, but also others, refugees they had saved weeks ago, armed and organized. Dominated orcs whose loyalty had been permanently redirected. Even a few beings that appeared to be rangers from Gondor, though how they had gotten this deep into Mordor was mystery. And coordinating it all, directing the battle with tactical brilliance that was keeping superior forces off balance, was a figure Talion had not expected to see again. Hirgon, the ranger from the Black Gate, who had been mind-broken by the Black Hand's power. Somehow he had recovered, and somehow he had organized this impossible assault. Celebrimbor's presence stirred with recognition and understanding. The Black Hand's attack on his mind was not perfectly executed. When I joined with you, some of my presence must have touched Hirgon as well. Just enough to help him heal, to give him purpose beyond his trauma. He has been preparing this for months. The realization was humbling. Their actions had consequences beyond what they could see. Small mercies granted along their journey had compounded into this moment. People they had saved, fighters they had trained, orcs they had dominated with purpose rather than cruelty. All of it coming together in coordinated resistance. Talion and Lithariel joined the battle immediately, their presence inspiring fighters who had thought them dead or worse. The assault's momentum increased, pushing deeper into Barad-dûr's outer defenses. For a glorious moment, victory seemed possible. They could actually damage Mordor's heart, could strike a blow that would set back Sauron's plans for years. Then the Black Hand emerged onto the walls, and everything changed. He raised his arms, and power flooded across the battlefield. Not attack, but summoning. From Barad-dûr's depths came horrors that had been held in reserve. Trolls 3 times the height of men, armored and carrying weapons that could crush stone. Fell beasts from Sauron's breeding pits, too horrible to describe. And worst of all, the Nazgûl, the 9 ringwraiths, who served as Sauron's ultimate enforcers. The tide of battle reversed in minutes. What had been coordinated assault became desperate retreat. Fighters who had been winning suddenly found themselves surrounded and overwhelmed. The attack had achieved surprise and initial success, but it lacked force to withstand Mordor's full military response. Hirgon fought his way to Talion's position, his face showing strain of coordinating retreat while under assault. We need to fall back. This was always going to be raid, not conquest. We hurt them, freed some prisoners, destroyed some supplies. Now we need to survive long enough to fight another day. Talion wanted to argue, wanted to push forward despite impossible odds. But Celebrimbor's ancient wisdom prevailed, reminding him that dead heroes achieved nothing. They began organized withdrawal, using the same careful tactics that had brought them this far. The Black Hand did not pursue personally, apparently content to let his forces do the work. But he watched from the walls, and even at distance, Talion could feel his gaze. This was not over. This was barely beginning. The destruction of the ring had bought time, but Sauron's plans were far larger than single artifact. They had won battle while losing the war's initiative. The survivors regrouped miles from Barad-dûr, taking stock of losses and achievements. They had freed perhaps 50 prisoners. They had destroyed significant supplies and killed hundreds of orcs. They had proven that Mordor's heart was not invulnerable, but the cost had been steep. More than half the attacking force had died, and those who survived were wounded in body and spirit. Lithuriel found Talion sitting apart from the others, staring back toward the distant tower that dominated the horizon. She sat beside him in companionable silence, both too exhausted for words. Finally, she spoke. "We are not winning this war. You realize that, yes? Every victory is temporary. Every achievement costs more than we can afford. Sauron has infinite resources and infinite patience. We have neither." "I know," Talion admitted. "But what choice do we have? Surrender means enslavement. Doing nothing means slow defeat. At least fighting gives us chance, however small." "There is fourth option," Celebrimbor said, his voice carrying to Lithuriel through their connection. "We have learned that rings are not answer. We have learned that direct confrontation achieves little. Perhaps the solution is neither power nor force, but something else entirely. Something Sauron cannot anticipate because it is not something he would ever consider." "What?" Talion asked. "Hope," Celebrimbor said simply. "Not power, not domination, not even victory. Just stubborn, irrational hope that good can triumph despite all evidence to the contrary. It is the one thing Sauron has never understood, has never been able to corrupt or control, because hope requires no ring, no army, no strategic advantage. It simply requires refusing to accept defeat." The philosophy was naive, almost childish in its simplicity. But looking at the survivors, at people who had lost everything and still chose to fight, Talion saw the truth in it. They were not winning because they were strong. They were surviving because they refused to stop hoping. That was power of different kind, one that could not be forged or taken. The Black Hand could try to break them, could pursue and punish and torment. But as long as even one person refused to accept Sauron's dominion, the war continued. That was both inspiration and burden. Freedom and responsibility combined. They could not win in traditional sense, but they could never truly lose either. As long as they drew breath, resistance existed. The survivors began moving again, heading toward temporary safety, knowing they would need to fight again tomorrow and the day after, and every day until either they died or Sauron fell. It was an exhausting prospect. They would hope because despair served only their enemy. And somewhere in the darkness of Barad-dûr, The Black Hand was already planning his next move, adapting to their defiance, preparing new traps and torments. The game continued with stakes that could not be higher and outcome that remained uncertain. The only certainty was that neither side would stop until the question was finally definitively answered. Weeks following the Barad-dûr raid brought slow erosion of hope. The Black Hand's response was not immediate retaliation, but something far more insidious. He began systematically hunting down everyone associated with the attack, not just killing them, but making examples that would discourage future resistance. Entire families were exterminated for having one member participate. Villages suspected of providing supplies were razed completely. The message was clear and brutal. Hirgan's coalition fractured under the pressure. Groups that had united for the raid retreated to their separate territories, unwilling to risk additional exposure. The brief moment of unified resistance collapsed back into scattered survivors fighting isolated battles. The temporary victory had purchased nothing but increased suffering. Talion watched this dissolution with growing sense of failure. His actions, his choices, had led to this. If he had never encouraged the resistance, never inspired people to fight back, they might have survived in slavery rather than dying in failed rebellion. The weight of every death sat on his shoulders, made heavier by knowledge that he would continue living long after they were gone. Lithariel tried to maintain organization, but even her considerable leadership skills could not overcome the fundamental problem. They lacked resources, lacked numbers, and most critically, lacked any path to actual victory. Every fighter who joined them was another person doomed to death or capture. Recruiting became ethically questionable when the outcome was predetermined. The resistance camp, already reduced from the raid's losses, continued shrinking. Some fighters simply disappeared in the night, choosing escape over continued, hopeless struggle. Others were captured during supply runs or reconnaissance missions. A few died from infected wounds or diseases that could not be treated with their limited medical knowledge. The camp that had once housed nearly 100 people dwindled to perhaps 30, then 20, then less. Gollum reappeared during this dark time, looking even more haggard than usual. The creature had been absent since the forge room chaos, presumably hiding in whatever holes and caves he preferred. His return brought no comfort, only cryptic warnings that made bad situations seem worse. The Black Hand is coming, yes, precious. Coming with all his terrible power, Gollum hissed, rocking back and forth in agitation. He knows where you hide, knows all your secrets. Gollum heard them planning, heard them laughing about the trap they prepare. No escape this time. No, only pain and darkness and ending. Talion wanted to dismiss this as more of Gollum's madness, but the creature had proven reliable source of intelligence, despite his obvious mental deterioration. If he said the Black Hand knew their location, it was probably true. They needed to move, to abandon this camp, and find new shelter. But where? Mordor's geography offered limited options, and they were running out of places that were not already compromised. Celebrimbor had been unusually quiet since the Forge incident, his presence in Talion's mind subdued and contemplative. When he finally spoke, his words carried resignation that was deeply unlike the usually confident Wraith. "We have failed," Celebrimbor said simply. not just tactically, but fundamentally. I thought I could use my knowledge to oppose Sauron. Thought that understanding ringcraft would provide advantage. But I was the one who taught him those techniques in the first place. Everything I know, he knows better. Every tactic I devise, he has already countered. I am not solution. I am part of the problem. The admission would have been more impactful if Talion had not already reached similar conclusion. They were not heroes on path to victory. They were survivors delaying inevitable defeat. The only question was how much additional suffering they would cause before accepting that reality. The attack came 3 days later, at dawn, when human defenders were least alert and orc forces most effective. The Black Hand did not lead personally this time, apparently considering them unworthy of his direct attention. Instead, he sent the Tower of Sauron with overwhelming force, designed to leave no survivors. The tower had learned from previous encounters. He did not engage in complex tactics or attempt to capture anyone. His forces simply surrounded the camp and began systematic extermination. There was no bravery in the resistance fighters' deaths, no glorious last stands. They were simply overwhelmed by superior numbers and butchered where they stood. Talion fought with desperate fury, his blade moving faster than human eye could follow. Wraith powers unleashed without restraint. He killed dozens of orcs, cut down Uruks that should have been unstoppable, even managed to wound one of the tower's lieutenants. None of it mattered. For every enemy he killed, 3 more appeared. The mathematics of combat were absolute and unforgiving. Lithariel died saving a child, throwing herself in front of blow meant for a young girl who had been born in the resistance camp and knew no other life. The weapon that killed her was crude orc spear, nothing, just sharpened metal driven through her back and emerging from her chest. She looked at Talion with surprise, as if death had caught her unexpectedly despite its constant proximity. Then she fell, and the light left her eyes, and someone else he cared about was gone. The child she saved died anyway, moments later, killed by different orc who cared nothing for sacrifice or nobility. The entire gesture was rendered meaningless by simple indifference to human life. That was perhaps the cruelest part, that Lithariel's death achieved nothing, protected no one, merely delayed the inevitable by seconds. Talion tried to reach her body, to at least close her eyes and give her some dignity in death. But the tower himself blocked his path, the massive black captain standing over Lithariel's corpse with casual contempt. "Did you believe your story would have different ending?" the tower asked. His voice was deeper than the Black Hand's, resonant with centuries of violence. Did you imagine that determination and righteous anger would overcome simple military superiority? This is reality of war. The stronger force wins. Everything else is children's fantasy. Talion attacked with rage that overwhelmed tactical thinking. His assault was furious and completely ineffective. The tower's weapon came down in strike designed to behead. Talion saw it coming, but could not move fast enough to avoid it. His immortality would not protect against decapitation, would not regenerate body from complete destruction. This was truly the end, death that would finally be permanent. The blow never landed. Something massive struck the tower from the side, sending the black captain sprawling. Talion's vision cleared enough to see his savior, and confusion joined the chaos. A Caragor, one of Mordor's great predatory beasts, had attacked the tower. But this was not random wildlife. The beast moved with purpose, with intelligence beyond animal instinct. The Caragor turned toward Talion, and he saw intelligence in its eyes that should not exist in animal. Then the beast changed, form shifting in ways that defied natural law. Within seconds, where Caragor had stood, now crouched a man, or something wearing man's shape. He was weathered and wild, dressed in skins and carrying weapons of bone and scavenged metal. "You need to run," the stranger said urgently. "I can buy you perhaps 5 minutes. After that, you are on your own." "Who are you?" Talion asked, too shocked to move immediately. "Someone who owes Celebrimbor a debt from long ago," the man replied. "Someone who remembers when the Bright Lord was actually bright, before Sauron corrupted everything. Now run, before I change my mind about this suicidal rescue." He shifted back to Caragor form and launched himself at recovering tower. The Black Captain met the attack with roar that shook the ground. The two beings, both far beyond normal limits, engaged in battle that was terrifying in its ferocity. Talion ran, not from cowardice, but from recognition that staying meant rendering the sacrifice meaningless. He grabbed the child who Lithariel had died trying to save, scooped her up, despite her terrified struggles, and fled into the wastes. Behind him, the camp burned. The resistance fighters were dead or dying. Everything they had built, everyone they had saved, all of it was ending in fire and blood. Celebrimbor's presence in his mind was fractured, grief and guilt overwhelming the ancient wraith. "This is my fault, all of it. I brought this upon them. My pride, my refusal to simply accept defeat, my insistence that I could somehow change thousands of years of failure. Everyone who followed us, everyone who believed in us, they died because I was too arrogant to accept that some battles cannot be won." Talion wanted to argue, but could not find words. The wraith was right. They had led people to death with promises they could not keep. The resistance had been doomed from the start, and continuing to fight had only prolonged the suffering. Every person who died, he ran through Mordor's wasteland, carrying the sobbing child, not knowing where he was going, not having any destination in mind beyond away. His body moved on autopilot, enhanced by wraith power, but driven by nothing more than animal instinct to escape. There was no plan, no strategy, just blind flight from overwhelming force. The landscape blurred together. Ash fields gave way to rocky outcroppings, gave way to sulphurous marshes. Talion splashed through toxic water that would have killed normal human, his supernatural resilience protecting him, even as it condemned him to continued existence. The child in his arms had stopped crying, lapsed into shock that might be mercy. Finally, when his body was ready to collapse despite immortal nature, when he had run so far that even orc pursuit would have difficulty finding him, Talion stopped. He was in region of Mordor he did not recognize, somewhere in the wilderness between organized orc territories, relatively safe, at least temporarily. He set the child down gently. She could not have been more than 6 years old, thin from malnutrition, scarred from life in constant conflict. She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much death, that held no hope or trust or any positive emotion. Just empty acceptance of continued horror. "What is your name?" Talion asked gently. The child did not answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely whisper. "Terra." Lithariel said my name was Terra. "Terra," Talion repeated. "I am Talion. I am going to keep you safe. I promise." The child looked at him with devastating wisdom far beyond her years. "Lithariel promised to keep me safe too. Then she died. Everyone dies. You will die too, and then I will be alone again." The accusation was not angry or even sad. Just factual statement from someone who had learned that attachment led only to loss. Talion had no response that would not be lie. He probably would get her killed. Everyone around him died eventually. That was the pattern, the inevitable outcome of his cursed existence. Celebrimbor's voice was hollow. "Let me go. Break our bond. Let me pass to whatever comes next for wraiths. Without me, you can die like normal man. The child could inherit your equipment and knowledge, have chance to survive on her own. Better than being dragged down with us." For the first time since their binding, Talion seriously considered it. What purpose did their partnership serve anymore? They had failed at every objective, accomplished nothing except spreading suffering. Breaking the bond might kill him, but death no longer seemed like terrible fate. It might even be mercy. He reached inward, examining the connection that bound them together. It was complex working, woven into the fundamental fabric of his being. Unraveling it would require time and concentration, but it was theoretically possible. He could free Celebrimbor, could release himself from this Hath life, could end the cycle of failure and loss. His hands moved to begin the working, to start the separation, and then stopped, not because he suddenly found hope or purpose, but because of the child. Terra sat nearby, watching him with empty eyes, waiting to see if this adult would abandon her like all the others had. If he died now, she would be alone in Mordor, with no protection and no chance of survival. "I cannot," Talion said to Celebrimbor. "Not yet. Not while she needs protection." "She will die anyway," Celebrimbor said. The statement not cruel, but simply honest. "We cannot keep her safe. We could not keep anyone safe. This is just prolonging the inevitable." "Perhaps," Talion acknowledged, "but prolonging is all we have ever done. Delay the inevitable, buy time, survive another day. If that is all we can offer, then we offer it until we cannot anymore." The decision made, he stood and began preparing temporary shelter. The area offered some natural cover, caves formed by ancient lava flows that would hide them from casual observation. No water source, but he could range out to find supplies once Terra was settled. Food was more difficult problem, but Mordor had wildlife that could be hunted if one was desperate enough. As he worked, his mind processed the scale of their loss. The resistance was effectively destroyed. Everyone he had known, everyone who had fought alongside him, was dead or scattered. Lithariel, who had become friend and confidant, was gone. Hirgon's location was unknown. Possibly captured or killed. The mysterious shapeshifter who had saved him might have survived the tower, but more likely had died buying time for escape that achieved nothing. The Black Hand had won decisively, not through clever strategy or overwhelming power, but through simple application of superior resources. They had been crushed like insects, their defiance meaning nothing in face of Mordor's military machine. All their small victories, all their careful plans, all their hope and determination had amounted to exactly nothing. Talion felt something break inside him. Not dramatic shattering, but quiet internal collapse. The part of him that believed in justice, that insisted good must eventually triumph, simply gave up. The universe was not just or fair. Evil won sometimes, not because it was stronger or smarter, but because it was willing to be more ruthless and patient. Sauron had millennia to work toward his goals. The resistance had had months. That night, sitting in the cave with Terra sleeping fitfully nearby, Talion spoke to Celebrimbor with complete honesty. I do not know what we are doing anymore. I do not know why we continue. Revenge is meaningless when everyone I cared about is dead. Resistance is pointless when it just creates more corpses. Survival for its own sake holds no appeal. What is the purpose of existing when existence achieves nothing? Celebrimbor had no answer. The ancient wraith, who had lived thousands of years and witnessed ages of Middle-earth, could not provide wisdom or comfort. He was as lost as Talion, trapped in same hopeless situation, unable to see any path forward that led anywhere but continued suffering. I have failed at everything, Celebrimbor finally said. Failed as smith, created weapons that enslaved rather than liberated. Failed as resistance against Sauron, accomplished nothing in thousands of years, but watching him grow stronger. Failed as partner to you, led you into traps, and got everyone around us killed. I am not ancient wisdom or powerful ally. I am just mistake that will not die, error compounding across millennia. The dual despair was suffocating. Talion and Celebrimbor, separately broken and together powerless, sat in the darkness and contemplated the fundamental hopelessness of their situation. They could not die, could not win, could not even make their suffering meaningful through sacrifice. They were simply trapped in extended nightmare with no wake-up, no ending, no escape. Days blurred together in that cave. Talion ventured out only when necessary, hunting what food he could find and avoiding any contact with orc patrols. Terra remained catatonic, barely eating, not speaking, just existing in traumatized silence. She would wake screaming from nightmares, and Talion would try to comfort her, knowing his efforts were inadequate. Gollum found them somehow, the creature's ability to locate people in Mordor's vastness remaining inexplicable. He brought fish, surprisingly, actual edible food rather than his usual cryptic warnings. The gesture of kindness from such corrupted being was jarring. Gollum knows the pain, yes, precious, the creature said, watching Terra with something approaching compassion. Knows what it is to lose everything. To become empty thing that just continues because stopping is too hard. The precious took everything from Gollum, made him into this, but still Gollum goes on, still survives. Not because there is hope, because not surviving is harder. The philosophy was bleak, but resonant. They continued not from strength or purpose, but because cessation required more energy than persistence. It was existence at its most minimal, reduced to basic biological imperative to keep breathing. There was no meaning in it, no nobility, just the dumb mechanical continuation of life. Celebrimbor spoke aloud through Talion, addressing Gollum directly. You warned us. You told us this path led to ruin. Why did you continue helping if you knew it was doomed? Gollum's laugh was bitter, because doom is all there is. Yes, precious. Everything leads to doom. Everything ends badly. The only choice is what doom we choose, what end we walk toward. Gollum chose to help because it was different doom than hiding and surviving alone. Not better, not worse, just different. And sometimes different is enough. The three of them, broken remnants of resistance that had never truly existed, sat together in that cave. A cursed wraith wearing dead man's flesh, a creature so corrupted he barely qualified as human anymore, and a child who had known nothing but horror her entire life. They were what remained of hope in Mordor. They were the best that opposition to Sauron could muster. The absurdity would have been funny if it were not so devastatingly tragic. "What do we do now?" Talion asked, not expecting answer, but needing to voice the question. "Survive," Gollum said simply. "Find food, find shelter. Avoid the nasty orcs and the black captains. Survive today. Then tomorrow, survive again. Then the day after. It is not plan, not hope, just continuing. And sometimes that is all we can do." The next weeks were grinding exercise in basic existence. Talion hunted and scavenged, keeping them fed through means that would have disgusted him in his previous life. He ate things that should not be edible, drank from sources that were questionable at best. The child Tara slowly began engaging with the world again, though she remained deeply traumatized and prone to sudden terror at unexpected sounds. Celebrimbor withdrew into himself, his presence in Talion's mind becoming barely perceptible. The wraith seemed to be trying to disappear without actually departing, to minimize his existence as penance for his failures. Talion did not try to draw him out, understanding the need for isolation. Then came the day when everything shifted again. Talion was returning from successful hunt, carrying meat from creature he had killed, when he found their cave occupied, not by orcs, thankfully, but by the shapeshifter who had saved him during the camp massacre. The man sat calmly, apparently having been waiting for some time. "You are difficult to find when you wish to hide," the stranger observed. "Took me 3 weeks to track you down." Talion's hand went to his weapon instinctively. "What do you want?" "To talk," the man said. "To explain some things that you need to understand. To offer perspective that might give you reason to continue beyond mere survival instinct." "I am not interested in more false hope," Talion said flatly. "Save your inspirational speech for someone naive enough to believe it." The stranger smiled, expression carrying sadness. "I am not here to inspire. I am here to inform. You believe you have failed completely, that your resistance accomplished nothing. You are wrong. Not in ways that feel good or provide comfort, but wrong nonetheless." Against his better judgment, Talion sat. Tara hid behind him, clearly afraid of the stranger. Gollum, who had been lurking as usual, remained at the cave entrance, ready to flee if necessary. "My name is Torvin," the stranger began. "I am one of the last of an ancient order that has opposed Sauron since the Second Age. We are shapeshifters, skin changers, beings who can take animal form. Sauron has hunted us nearly to extinction because we can infiltrate his strongholds and observe his plans." He paused, gathering thoughts. "The resistance you inspired, the fighters who joined your cause, they did not die meaninglessly. Their sacrifice has had ripples you cannot see. Gondor has received word of events in Mordor. has begun preparing for invasion they had thought still distant. Other resistance cells, scattered across Sauron's domain, have been emboldened by your actions. Even in defeat, you showed that opposition was possible. People are still dead, Talion said. Nothing you say changes that. No, Torvin agreed. Nothing changes that. Death is permanent and terrible, but meaning is not measured in survival. Sometimes the most meaningful actions are the ones that fail in traditional sense, but inspire others to continue. You think you have been defeated. Sauron thinks he has crushed rebellion. You are both wrong. What you started cannot be stopped by killing the starters. Celebrimbor stirred in Talion's consciousness, paying attention to conversation. You speak of inspiration and legacy. Pretty words for corpses. What tangible difference has anything we did make to ultimate outcome? Torvin looked at Talion, apparently seeing through to the wraith within. The Black Hand was supposed to complete his new ring. You stopped that. The ceremony was planned down to the smallest detail, years of preparation, and you disrupted it completely. That alone bought Middle-earth months, possibly years. In a war measured in ages, years matter. We destroyed his ring, Talion acknowledged, and in response, he destroyed the resistance. Fair trade? Yes, Torvin said without hesitation. Absolutely yes. The ring would have enslaved thousands. Your resistance lost dozens. The mathematics are cruel, but clear. You made the right tactical choice, even if it does not feel victorious. The argument was logical, but hollow. Talion understood the utilitarian calculation, but could not make himself care. Numbers on ledgers meant nothing compared to Lithariel's eyes, going dark, to the child who still woke screaming, to all the specific individual losses that stacked up into overwhelming grief. Why are you here? Talion asked tiredly. What do you want from me? Torvin stood, preparing to depart. I am here because someone needs to tell you the truth. You are not hero. You are not savior. You are weapon that your enemies tried to forge and you refused to be. That refusal, that simple stubborn rejection of your assigned purpose, is the most powerful thing you have done. Sauron had plans for you, intricate and brilliant plans. You broke them by being unpredictable, by choosing wrong option from his perspective. He moved toward the cave entrance, then paused. The war is not over. Your part in it is not finished. Whether you choose to accept that or not is your decision. But know this, giving up is also choice, and it serves Sauron as surely as cooperation would. Sometimes the most defiant thing we can do is simply refuse to stop existing. Then he was gone, shifting to bird form and taking flight before Talion could respond. The cave felt emptier after his departure, his presence having filled space that now gaped. Terra spoke for the first time in days. Is he right? Did Lithariel die for something? Talion wanted to say yes, to give the child comfort of meaning. But he could not lie, not about something this important. I do not know. Maybe. Maybe her death bought time or inspired others. Or maybe she just died because we made bad choices. I do not have answers. The child considered this with serious expression. I think she chose to die. She could have run or hidden. She chose to save me. That was her choice. If it helped Sauron or hurt him does not matter. She chose, and that makes it hers, not yours. The wisdom from someone so young was startling. Talion had been carrying guilt for every death, as if his decisions removed others' agency. But Lefariel had made her own choice. The resistance fighters had chosen to fight, knowing the risks. Even his own family, in a way, had chosen to live at the Black Gate despite the danger. They were not victims of his failures, but actors in their own stories. Celebrimbor emerged from his self-imposed isolation. The child understands something we have forgotten. We are not responsible for others' choices, only our own. We failed to achieve our goals, but we did not fail to choose. Every decision was ours, made with as much wisdom as we possessed at the time. Does that make the deaths acceptable? Talion asked. No, Celebrimbor said firmly. Death is never acceptable when it could have been avoided, but it makes them honest. We did not lie or manipulate. We offered path. Their deaths are tragedy, but not betrayal. The reframing did not erase the pain or the guilt, but it made them bearable. Talion was not monster who had led innocents to slaughter. He was fallible being who had tried his best with imperfect knowledge and limited power. The difference mattered, even if the outcome was same. Over following days, something shifted in the cave. Not hope returning, nothing so dramatic or naive, but purpose crystallizing from different angle. They would not win. They probably would not even survive long term. But they could continue choosing, continue acting according to their values, rather than external pressure. That was agency, and agency was power of its own kind. Terra began speaking more, asking questions about the world beyond Mordor, about Gondor and other lands she had never seen. Talion answered as best he could, drawing on memories of his previous life, describing green fields and clean water, and people living without constant fear. The child listened with fascination, these descriptions being closest thing to hope she could access. Gollum watched these conversations with interest. Precious Ranger is teaching the small one to dream. Dangerous thing. Yes, precious. Dreams hurt when reality crushes them. Everything hurts, Talion replied. At least dreams hurt for reason. Perhaps, Gollum said. Or perhaps dreams hurt worst of all, because they show us what we cannot have. But Gollum supposes we dream anyway, cannot help ourselves, is part of being alive. Yes, the dreaming and the hurting and the continuing, despite both. The three of them formed strange family unit. Talion, the cursed protector. Gollum, the corrupted advisor. Terra, the traumatized child. They survived together, not because they were winning, but because stopping was harder. They ate together, slept in shifts for security, told stories to pass time. It was not victory or triumph or anything resembling success. But it was life, continuing in spite of everything. And in Barad-dûr, the Black Hand was already planning his next move, already adapting to their resistance. The game was not over. The war continued. But for the first time since his resurrection, Talion was not playing by anyone's rules but his own. He had hit the lowest point, touched bottom, experienced complete failure, and discovered that failure was not ending, but transition. What came next remained uncertain, but at least it was truly his choice.